These are the this is the 5-8 assignment that I'm going to go through. So with this one, it's basically solved for you. This is all using reciprocal. So the reciprocal of cotangent is tangent, and then the reciprocal of negative radical 3 over 3, when you go through all the work, is just negative radical 3. So we're really thinking about tangent of negative radical 3. Tangent is negative in the second and the fourth quadrant. And the radical 3 should tell you that you're thinking about a 60-degree reference angle in those two quadrants. In the second quadrant, your reference angle would be 2 pi over 3. In the fourth quadrant, your 60-degree reference angle is 5 pi over 3. The next one, you need to kick the radical 3 to the other side, divide each by 2. So it's cosine of theta is equal to radical 3 over 2. Cosine is your base, and radical 3 over 2 is a 30-degree reference angle. Cosine is going to be positive in the first and the fourth quadrant. Your 30-degree guys in your first and your fourth quadrant are pi over 6 and 7 pi over 6. Secant squared minus 4 equals 0. Kick your 4 to the other side. Take the square root. So you have secant of x is equal to plus or minus 2. The reciprocal of secant is cosine, and the reciprocal of plus or minus 2 is plus or minus 1/2. Talking about your base, and you're talking about a 60-degree reference angle, and it needs to be all the 60-degree guys because it's plus or minus. So pi over 3, 2 pi over 3, 4 pi over 3, and 5 pi over 3. This one, not beautiful, but it can definitely be done. What you want to do is get that squared guy in terms of your linear version. So typically you want to replace the quadratic term with your Pythagorean substitution. So cosine squared plus sine squared equals 1. Solve for cosine squared, put that into your equation. Be careful, there's a 2 out front. So this is actually going to turn into 2 times 1, and then 2 times negative sine squared of x. 2 minus 2 sine squared of x plus sine of x, and then I took that 1 and brought it over to the other side. I wanted it set equal to 0 so I could factor it. Get negative 2 sine squared of x plus sine of x plus 1. I multiplied everything by a negative 1 just so I could have a positive quadratic term. It should factor down into this one, so this is before I took out the trash. Sine of x is equal to 1. Sine of x is equal to negative 1/2. For it to be 1, that's where your height is 1, so that's pi over 2. For negative 1/2, that's going to be the third and the fourth quadrant. Remember, sine is talking about your height. It's 30-degree reference angle, 7 pi over 6, 11 pi over 6. For 5 through 8, you needed all the exact values, and your interval was this guy. This is 2 rotations around, so this is what we talked about in the last part of 5-8. Kick your radical to the other side. The reciprocal of cosecant is sine. Keep your 2x, and the reciprocal of negative radical 2, when you rationalize it, is negative radical 2 over 2. 45-degree reference angle, sine talks about height, third and fourth quadrant. Your first trip around, you're going to get 5 pi over 4 and 7 pi over 4. So those guys hanging out right there. Second trip around, 13 pi over 4, 15 pi over 4. Your interval, though, you need to add this to every single answer because your interval is multiple rotations around that unit circle. Same with this one. So on this one, this was a little bit nicer. I had cosine as a quadratic and as a linear, so you can factor out that cosine. Cosine of theta equals, or cosine of beta equals 0. That's where there's no base, pi over 2. Solve for your cosine over here. So this is negative 1/2. Cosine is your base. You're thinking about 60 degrees again. So your 60 degree in the second quadrant is 2 pi over 3 and 4 pi over 3 in the third quadrant. Because the interval that we're on, you have to add 2 pi k to all of these answers as well. This one, another Pythagorean substitution. I usually just memorize this one and then look at what I need to kind of get to and manipulate it from there. I need to get rid of that squared, so I knew that I needed secant squared, so I divided everything by cosine. That was 1 plus tangent squared equals secant squared. Replace my secant squared with 1 plus tangent. Brought my twice times tangent over to the right-hand side, and it actually factors quite nicely. Tangent is equal to 1. You're looking at a 45-degree reference angle. Tangent's positive in the first and third quadrant. Pi over 4 plus 2 pi k, and 5 pi over 4 plus 2 pi k. Last one, this one's not lovely. Bring your cosine over, factor out your cosine, solve for that, pi over 2. Then you're left with this mess. The in-between step you would have radical 3 times tangent of x equals 1, divide by radical 3. Rationalize that. So now you're looking at a 30-degree reference angle that's positive. First and third quadrant, pi over 6 and 2 pi over 6, or 7 pi over 6. Add 2 pi k to each of those. The issue is this pi over 2 we're not going to include because tangent is undefined. So that would cause your equation to fail. So just make sure you anytime you have tangent, you're looking for pi over 2, whether or not that's going to pass or fail.